Did you know that during the making of The Boys from Brazil, Gregory Peck refused to wear fake teeth for his role as the infamous Nazi doctor Joseph Mengele because he wanted audiences to see evil through his own eyes, not through makeup? He believed the horror should come from within, not from props. This wasn't just another thriller about World War II villains hiding in South America. This was a film that dared to imagine the unimaginable. What if Hitler's darkest dream didn't die in that Berlin bunker? What if it lived on in secret labs in small towns across the world? The movie shocked audiences in 1978, and even today, its questions feel dangerously real. The story was wild, the acting was powerful, and the secrets behind the camera were just as strange as anything on screen. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about The Boys from Brazil. Number 20. The book came from a nightmare writer. Ira Levin didn't plan to write a thriller about cloned Hitlers. He had already terrified the world with Rosemary's Baby and created paranoia with the Stepford Wives. But one night, he had a nightmare. He dreamed of young boys with dark hair and cold blue eyes, all looking exactly the same, walking through different countries. They smiled, but something felt wrong. When he woke up, he couldn't shake the image. He started thinking about cloning, about Nazi experiments, about what happens when evil refuses to die. He researched Joseph Mengele, the real-life doctor who tortured thousands in Auschwitz and then vanished into South America. Levin realized that science and history could create the perfect horror story. He wrote the novel in 1976, and it became a bestseller almost overnight. People were terrified because it felt possible. The world had just learned about cloning sheep and copying cells. What if someone used that science for something evil? The book asked a question that still haunts us today. Can you recreate a monster? Or does evil need more than just blood and genes? Levin never answered that question. He left it hanging like a shadow. The nightmare became a story, and the story became a warning. Number 19. Gregory Peck said yes to playing evil for 30 years. Gregory Peck played heroes. He was the noble lawyer in To Kill a Mockingbird. He was the brave captain, the kind father, the man you could trust. Directors loved him because audiences loved him. But when producer Martin Richards offered him the role of Joseph Mengele, Peck didn't hesitate. He said yes immediately. His friends were shocked. His agent warned him. Playing a Nazi war criminal could destroy his image. But Peck didn't care about image anymore. He was 62 years old, and he wanted a challenge. He wanted to scare people. He said in interviews that playing the same type of character over and over felt like acting in a cage. He wanted to break free. He studied Mengele's life, read about his experiments, watched footage of concentration camp survivors. Peck didn't try to make Mengele sympathetic. He played him as calm, intelligent, and completely without remorse. In one scene, Mengele talks about his work like a gardener discussing flowers. It's chilling because there's no anger, no madness, just cold logic. Peck's performance reminded the world that evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smiles. The role earned him some of the best reviews of his career, but it also gave him nightmares. He said he felt dirty after filming certain scenes, like the character had crawled under his skin. A hero played a monster, and both became unforgettable. Number 18. Laurence Olivier was dying while filming. Laurence Olivier was one of the greatest actors who ever lived. He had played Hamlet, Henry V, Richard III. He had won Oscars and broken hearts on stage and screen. But by 1978, his body was failing. He had cancer. He had muscle disease. He could barely walk without pain. His doctors told him to rest, to stop working, to save his strength. But when director Franklin J. Schaffner offered him the role of Ezra Lieberman, the aging Nazi hunter, Olivier said yes. He knew this might be his last great role. He arrived on set in Austria with a cane, his hands shaking, his breath short. The crew worried he wouldn't make it through a single scene. But when the cameras rolled, something incredible happened. Olivier became Lieberman. His weakness became the character's weakness. His exhaustion became Lieberman's exhaustion. In the film, Lieberman is old, tired, obsessed with catching one last monster before he dies. Olivier didn't have to act that part, he lived it. In one scene, Lieberman collapses from a heart attack. Olivier's real heart was failing too. He used his pain, his fear, his anger at death itself, and poured it all into the performance. Between takes, he sat in a wheelchair, oxygen mask on his face. Then he'd stand up, walk into frame, and deliver lines that made grown men cry. He didn't win the Oscar that year, but he proved that great acting isn't about strength, it's about truth. Olivier gave everything he had left, and it shows in every frame. Number 17. The Dobermans were trained to kill. The most terrifying scene in the film happens near the end. Mengele sets his pack of Doberman dogs on Lieberman in a dark house. The dogs are fast, vicious, relentless. They leap through windows, tear through doors, their eyes glowing in the shadows. It looks like pure chaos on screen, and behind the camera, it almost was. Director Franklin Schaffner wanted real Dobermans, not puppets or special effects. He hired a famous animal trainer from Germany who specialized in attack dogs. These weren't pets. They were working dogs trained for police and military operations. The trainers spent weeks teaching them to attack on command, to go for arms and legs, to look as dangerous as possible without actually hurting the actors. But dogs don't understand the difference between acting and reality. During rehearsals, one dog broke free and charged at a crew member. Another refused to stop biting a padded stunt sleeve. Olivier, already weak and exhausted, had to face these animals in close-quarters scenes. He was genuinely afraid, and that fear is written all over his face. Schaffner used that. He told Olivier to let the fear show, to not hide it. In the final cut, you can see Lieberman's terror. It's real, raw, human. The dogs were muzzled for certain shots and given commands in German so the actors wouldn't accidentally trigger them. Even so, several crew members refused to be in the room during filming. The scene became iconic because it didn't feel like a movie. It felt like survival. Sometimes the best horror comes from real danger, and those Dobermans were very, very real. Number 16. They filmed in real Nazi hiding places. The story takes place in South America, where many real Nazi officers fled after World War II. Instead of building fake villages or shooting in studios, the production team decided to film in actual locations where Nazis had lived. They traveled to small towns in Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina. They found old houses, forgotten roads, quiet farms where war criminals had hidden for decades. Some of these men were still alive, still living under false names, still free. The locals knew who they were, but said nothing. In one town in Paraguay, the crew rented a house that had once belonged to a German doctor suspected of being a Nazi officer. The house was dark, cold, filled with old furniture and faded photographs. Some crew members refused to sleep there. They said it felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by history. The production designer found medical books in the attic, written in German, with notes in the margins. No one knew if they were innocent or evidence of something terrible. Schaffner kept them as props. He wanted the film to feel real because the evil was real. In another location, they filmed in a small German school built by ex-Nazis for their children. The walls were covered in old maps of Europe, some still showing borders from 1939. It was eerie, like stepping into a time capsule of denial and nostalgia. The actors said filming in those places changed their performances. They weren't just pretending. They were walking through the footprints of real monsters. History wasn't a lesson. It was all around them. Still breathing, still waiting. Number 15. The cloning science was shockingly accurate in 1978. Most people thought cloning was pure science fiction. It sounded like something from a comic book, not real life. But Ira Levin had done serious research. He consulted with geneticists, biologists, and medical experts. He wanted to know if cloning a human being was actually possible. Most scientists said it wasn't, but they admitted the science was moving fast. Just 2 years earlier, in 1976, researchers had successfully cloned a frog. It was a major breakthrough. If you could clone a frog, why not a mouse? Why not a human? Levin took that question and ran with it. In the film, Mengele explains his plan to create 94 identical boys, all clones of Adolf Hitler. He doesn't just copy Hitler's DNA, he tries to recreate Hitler's childhood. He arranges for each boy to have an older father and a doting mother. He plans accidents, losses, trauma. He believes that genes plus environment equals destiny. Some scientists who saw the film said Levin got it mostly right. Cloning doesn't just copy a body, it copies potential. But personality, choices, morality, those come from experience, from life. The film asked a question that's even more important today. If we can clone a person, should we? and what happens if we clone the wrong person. In 1996, scientists cloned Dolly the sheep. In 2003, they cloned a cat. Today, we can clone organs, embryos, maybe even memories. The movie was fiction, but the science caught up. What looked impossible in 1978 is now just expensive. Number 14. Peck and Olivier barely spoke off camera. Gregory Peck and Laurence Olivier were two of the most respected actors in the world. Fans assumed they would become best friends on set, sharing stories and wisdom, but they barely spoke to each other when the cameras weren't rolling. It wasn't because of anger or jealousy. It was method. Peck played a cold, calculating Nazi. Olivier played a passionate, emotional Nazi hunter. Their characters hated each other, and both actors believed that staying in character off set would make their scenes more powerful. Olivier would sit alone between takes, muttering lines in Yiddish, holding a photograph of Holocaust survivors to remind himself why Lieberman kept fighting. Peck would read German philosophy and listen to Wagner on headphones. He wanted to think like Mengele, to understand how a man could do such terrible things and sleep at night. When they finally filmed their confrontation scene, the climax of the movie, it was electric. Olivier screamed. Peck smiled. The tension was real because they had kept it bottled up for weeks. The crew said you could feel the air change when the two actors entered the room. It wasn't acting anymore. It was two men, two ideologies, two ways of seeing the world, colliding in one small space. After the director yelled cut. On the final day, Peck and Olivier shook hands. Peck said, "You scared me." Olivier said, good. Then they went to separate trailers and never worked together again. The distance created the fire. The silence made the screams louder. Number 13. The Hitler Youth actors were kept separate. The film required casting dozens of young boys to play the Hitler clones. The production team auditioned hundreds of children across Europe and America. They needed boys with similar features, dark hair, blue eyes, strong jawlines. They found them in England, Austria, and the United States. But director Schaffner made a controversial decision. He ordered that the boys playing the clones be kept separate from the rest of the child actors. They had different trailers, different tutors, different meal times. Some parents were furious. They said it was cruel, unnecessary, divisive, but Schaffner explained his reasoning. He wanted the boys to feel different, isolated, special. He wanted them to bond with each other and no one else, just like the clones in the story. He told them they were part of a secret experiment, a special club. He gave them matching jackets and told them they were the most important actors in the film. It worked. When the boys appeared on screen together, they moved like a pack. They looked alike, acted alike, even blinked in sync. It was unsettling and brilliant. But after filming ended, some of the boys struggled. They had been told they were special for weeks. Then suddenly, they were just kids again. A few parents said their sons became withdrawn, confused about their identity. One mother said her son kept asking, "Am I still part of the experiment?" The film had blurred the line between acting and reality, and some of those boys never fully came back. Schaffner never apologized, but he also never used that technique again. The performance was perfect, but the cost was high. Number 12. Steve Guttenberg was an unknown. Before the boys from Brazil, Steve Guttenberg was nobody. He was 20 years old, fresh out of acting school, waiting tables in New York, going to auditions and getting rejected. He had done a tiny role in a forgettable movie and a couple of TV commercials. That was it. But when casting directors were looking for someone to play Barry Kohler, the young journalist who discovers Mengele's plan, they wanted someone new, someone hungry, someone who felt like a real person, not a star. Guttenberg auditioned 5 times. He was nervous, awkward, too eager. But Schaffner saw something. He saw a kid who wanted it so bad you could feel it through the screen. He cast him. Guttenberg couldn't believe it. He was going to act opposite Gregory Peck and Laurence Olivier, 2 living legends. His first day on set, he was so nervous he forgot his lines. Peck pulled him aside and said, "Relax, you're good. That's why you're here." It changed everything. Guttenberg loosened up, trusted himself, and delivered a performance that felt raw and real. His character gets killed halfway through the film, but people remembered him. After The Boys from Brazil, Guttenberg went on to star in Police Academy, Cocoon, and 3 Men and a Baby. He became one of the biggest comedy stars of the 1980s. But he always said this film was the one that taught him how to act. He learned from the best, and they didn't baby him. They pushed him, challenged him, made him earn every scene. He arrived as a waiter and left as an actor. Number 11, the ending was changed from the book in Ira Levin's novel. The ending is bleak and disturbing. Mengele is killed, but the clones survive. Lieberman chooses not to destroy them because they're just children. He can't murder innocent boys, even if they carry Hitler's DNA. The final image is haunting. Lieberman walking away, knowing that somewhere in the world, 94 little Hitlers are growing up. The movie almost kept that ending. Early scripts followed the book exactly. But test audiences hated it. They said it was too dark, too hopeless, too unresolved. They wanted justice. They wanted the villain punished and the heroes rewarded. The studio pressured Schaffner to change it. After weeks of arguing, Schaffner and the writers created a new ending. Lieberman still refuses to kill the boys, but one of the clones, a boy named Bobby, watches Mengele die and feels nothing. The boy is cold, detached, curious. It suggests that maybe the experiment worked. Maybe Hitler's evil did pass through the blood. The final scene shows Lieberman burning Mengele's files, destroying the list of clones. He chooses hope over fear. It's more optimistic than the book, but there's still a shadow. We don't know what happens to Bobby. We don't know if evil can be unlearned. Levin hated the new ending. He said it softened the message, made the horror easier to digest, but Schaffner defended it. He said movies aren't books. They need catharsis. They need to let the audience breathe. Both men were right. The book haunts you. The movie lets you sleep. But only barely. Number 10. Mengele's real family tried to stop the film. Josef Mengele was a real person, and in 1978, he was still alive. He was hiding somewhere in South America, old and paranoid, living under a false name. His family back in Germany, his son, his nephews, his cousins, were respectable people. They owned a successful factory, lived quiet lives, tried to forget their connection to one of history's most evil men. When they heard about The Boys from Brazil, they panicked. They hired lawyers and sent letters to the studio demanding the film be stopped. They claimed it was defamation, that it invaded their privacy, that it would ruin their lives. The studio's legal team reviewed the case and found a loophole. Mengele was a public figure, a wanted war criminal. You can't defame someone who's already infamous. The family had no legal grounds to stop the film, but they didn't give up. They contacted journalists, gave interviews, painted themselves as victims. They said the movie was sensationalist, exploitative, cruel. Some newspapers agreed. Others called them hypocrites. The controversy gave the film free publicity. People who had never heard of Ira Levin's book suddenly wanted to see the movie. When The Boys from Brazil premiered in Germany, Mengele's family stayed silent. They knew they had lost. Mengele himself never saw the film. He died in 1979, a year after its release, drowning while swimming off the coast of Brazil. His body wasn't identified until 1985. By then, the movie had become a classic, and the world had already judged him. Fiction had told the truth his family tried to hide. Number 9. The film was banned in Argentina. Argentina had a complicated relationship with Nazi war criminals. After World War II, the country secretly welcomed thousands of them. Some estimates say over 5,000 Nazis fled to Argentina, including high-ranking officers, scientists, and doctors. The government protected them, gave them new identities, let them live in peace. By 1978, many were still there. Old men living in quiet neighborhoods, their pasts buried under fake names and silent agreements. When The Boys from Brazil was set to release in Argentina, the government reviewed it and made a decision. Banned, no theaters could show it. No one could import it. The official reason was that the film distorted historical facts and promoted violence. But everyone knew the real reason. The film reminded people of Argentina's shameful secret. It asked uncomfortable questions. It made heroes out of Nazi hunters and monsters out of Nazi protectors. The ban lasted for years. People who wanted to see the film had to smuggle and bootleg VH tapes from Brazil or Chile. It became an underground sensation. In the 1990s, after Argentina's military dictatorship fell and democracy returned, the ban was quietly lifted. The film finally played in Buenos Aires theaters decades late. By then, most of the real Nazis were dead, but their children and grandchildren were still there, still silent, still carrying the weight of their father's sins. The movie wasn't just entertainment in Argentina, it was a mirror, and some people would rather smash the mirror than look at the reflection. Number 8. Peck's accent was coached by a Holocaust survivor. Gregory Peck wanted Mengele to sound authentic, not like a Hollywood villain doing a bad German accent. He needed a coach, someone who understood the language, the rhythm, the coldness. The studio hired a dialect coach named Ruth, a Jewish woman who had survived Auschwitz as a teenager. She had heard Mengele's voice. She had stood in lines while he decided who would live and who would die. She remembered his tone, calm, polite, clinical. When Ruth met Peck, she didn't shake his hand. She just stared at him. Peck asked if she was okay. She said, "I'm here to help you sound like the man who killed my family." The room went silent. For 2 weeks, Ruth worked with Peck every morning. She taught him how Mengele spoke, how he paused, how he smiled while saying terrible things. She made Peck listen to recordings of Nazi rallies, old propaganda films, interviews with SS officers. She told him stories, not for the script, just so he would understand the weight of the role. One day, Peck asked her why she took the job. She said, "Because the world needs to remember. If you do this right, people will remember." Peck later said those sessions were the hardest part of filming. He felt like he was carrying Ruth's pain, her memories, her nightmares. In one scene, Mengele talks about his experiments with detached pride. Peck channeled everything Ruth had taught him. When the scene wrapped, Ruth walked up to him and said, "You got it. That's him." Then she cried. Peck hugged her, and they both cried. She never watched the finished film. She said she didn't need to. She had already lived it once. Number 7. The Pope blessed the film This Sounds Impossible, but it's true. In 1978, Pope John Paul I had just been elected. He died mysteriously after only 33 days in office, and Pope John Paul II took his place. New pope was Polish. He had lived through the Nazi occupation. He had seen friends dragged away, villages burned, families destroyed. When he heard about the boys from Brazil, he requested a private screening. The Vatican rarely involved itself in Hollywood films, so this was unusual. The studio sent a print to Rome. The Pope watched it alone in a small theater with 2 advisors. Afterward, he asked to meet the producers. He told them, "This film is important. It reminds the world that evil is not an idea, it is a choice. People must see it." He gave the film an official blessing, a rare endorsement from the Catholic Church. The blessing didn't mean the Church funded or approved every detail, but it was a powerful symbol. It told Catholics around the world that this film had moral value, that it wasn't exploitation. It was education. The studio used the Pope's endorsement in international marketing. In Italy, Spain, and Latin America, the Pope's blessing helped the film reach audiences who might have otherwise ignored it. Some Jewish groups were uncomfortable. They wondered why a Christian pope was endorsing a story about Jewish suffering. But Holocaust survivors mostly welcomed it. They said the fight against forgetting needed every ally, every voice, every blessing. The Pope never spoke publicly about the film again, but his support opened doors that money couldn't. Number 6. One clone actor became a real scientist. Among the boys cast as Hitler clones, one stood out, not for his acting, but for what he did after. His name was Jeremy, a 12-year-old from London with sharp blue eyes and an intense curiosity. During filming, Jeremy kept asking questions. He asked the science advisor how cloning worked. He asked the makeup artist how fake blood was made. He asked the camera crew how lenses captured light. He was fascinated by everything. Schaffner noticed and started giving him books, science journals, articles about genetics, copies of Ira Levin's research notes. Jeremy read everything. After the film wrapped, Jeremy went back to school, but he couldn't stop thinking about cloning. He studied biology, chemistry, physics. He got into Cambridge University and earned a degree in genetics. He went on to earn a PhD and became a researcher specializing in ethical questions around cloning and gene editing. In 2018, 40 years after the film, Jeremy gave a TED Talk. He opened by saying, "When I was 12, I played a clone of Adolf Hitler. It changed my life." He talked about how the film sparked his interest in science and ethics. He said the movie taught him that knowledge is neutral, but how we use it defines us. Mengele used science for evil, but science itself isn't evil. People are. Jeremy now advises governments on cloning laws and genetic research. He's helped write policies that prevent the kind of horrors Mengele imagined. The boy who pretended to be a monster grew up to fight monsters. Fiction inspired reality, and reality became hope. Number 5. The score was almost thrown out. Composer Jerry Goldsmith was hired to write the music for The Boys from Brazil. Goldsmith was a legend. He had scored Planet of the Apes, Chinatown, The Omen. He knew how to make an audience feel dread, hope, terror, love. For this film, he composed a haunting, complex score that mixed eerie choral chants with sharp, violent strings. It was strange, unsettling, brilliant, but when Schaffner first heard it, he hated it. He said it was too weird, too experimental, too distracting. He wanted something simpler, more traditional. Goldsmith was furious. He argued that the story wasn't traditional, it was about cloning Hitler. It needed music that felt wrong, that made people uncomfortable. Schaffner refused to budge. He threatened to replace Goldsmith and hire someone else. Goldsmith walked out. For 2 weeks, the film sat in editing with no score. The studio panicked. They brought in a mediator, a veteran producer who had worked with both men before. He convinced Schaffner to give Goldsmith one more chance. He told Goldsmith to soften a few cues, make the music a little more accessible. Goldsmith agreed. Barely, he re-recorded some sections, adjusted the balance, but kept the core of his vision intact. When Schaffner heard the new version, he didn't apologize, but he didn't complain either. He let it stay. When the film premiered, critics praised the score. It was nominated for an Oscar. Goldsmith didn't win, but he proved his point. The music became iconic, dark, unsettling, unforgettable. Schaffner never admitted he was wrong, but years later he said, Goldsmith's music made the film better. That was the closest he ever got to saying sorry. Number 4. The climax was filmed in one take. The final confrontation between Lieberman and Mengele takes place in a dark house. Mengele's dogs attack. Lieberman fights back. The two men struggle, scream, bleed. It's chaotic, brutal, and terrifying. Most directors would film this scene in pieces, close-ups, wide shots, inserts, safety takes. But Schaffner wanted it to feel real, unbroken, raw. He decided to shoot the entire climax in one continuous take. No cuts, no breaks, just pure action. The crew thought he was insane. Olivier was 71, weak and sick. Peck was 62. The scene required running, fighting, falling, dodging dogs. One mistake, and they'd have to start over. Schaffner rehearsed it for 3 days. He mapped out every movement, every step, every word. He installed hidden cameras around the set so he could capture every angle without stopping. On the day of the shoot, the cast and crew gathered in silence. Everyone knew this was it. The cameras rolled. Olivier stumbled through the door, gasping. Peck smiled, cold and calm. The dogs charged. Olivier swung a cane. Peck grabbed a knife. They screamed, bled, fought. The scene lasted 4 minutes and 18 seconds. When Schaffner yelled cut, the entire crew erupted in applause. Olivier collapsed into a chair, shaking. Peck sat on the floor, breathing hard. They had done it. One take. Perfect. Schaffner kept that take in the final film. You can feel the exhaustion, the fear, the stakes. It's not polished or pretty. It's survival. That's what made it unforgettable. No second chances, no safety nets, just two old men giving everything they had left. Number 3. A real Nazi hunter consulted on the film. Simon Wiesenthal was the most famous Nazi hunter in the world. He had survived the Holocaust, lost 89 family members, and dedicated his life to tracking down war criminals. He found Adolf Eichmann. He found Franz Stangl. He found hundreds of men who thought they had escaped justice. When the producers of The Boys from Brazil approached him for help, he almost said no. He didn't trust Hollywood. He thought they would trivialize the Holocaust, turn it into cheap entertainment. But after reading Ira Levin's book, he changed his mind. He agreed to consult on the film, but only under one condition: the story had to be honest. No glorification of Nazis. No softening of their crimes. The producers agreed. Wiesenthal flew to the set in Austria and spent a week with the cast and crew. He showed them photographs, documents, testimonies. He told them stories about real Nazi hunters, men and women who risked their lives to find monsters hiding in plain sight. He told Olivier that Lieberman was based partly on him and partly on other hunters who never got famous, who died unknown and unrecognized. Olivier asked Wiesenthal why he kept hunting, even when it seemed hopeless. Wiesenthal said, "Because if we stop remembering, they win. Memory is the only weapon we have." That line almost made it into the film, but it was cut for time. Wiesenthal watched the finished movie at a private screening. Afterward, he shook Schaffner's hand and said, "You did not lie. That is enough." He never spoke about the film publicly, but his endorsement mattered. It told survivors that this wasn't exploitation. It was remembrance, and in the fight against forgetting, every story counts. Number 2. Mengele's props were real medical instruments. The production designer wanted Mengele's secret lab to look authentic. He didn't want plastic props or movie fakery. He wanted real tools, real instruments, the kind of equipment Mengele might have actually used. So the team contacted medical museums and antique dealers across Europe. They bought scalpels, syringes, forceps, bone saws, all from the 1930s and 40s. Some of the instruments came from hospitals that had been active during the war. No one could prove they were used in concentration camps, but no one could prove they weren't. The crew found the props deeply disturbing. One nurse, who worked as a medical consultant, refused to touch them. She said they felt cursed, haunted by the hands that had held them. During filming, several actors complained. They said the instruments made the scenes feel too real, too heavy. Peck insisted on using them. He said if the audience was going to believe Mengele was real, every detail had to be real. In one scene, Mengele examines a tray of surgical tools, picking them up one by one, explaining their uses. Peck didn't memorize those lines. He improvised based on what the tools actually did. It made the scene chilling and educational. After filming, the studio didn't know what to do with the instruments. Throwing them away felt wrong. Keeping them felt worse. Eventually, they donated them to a Holocaust museum in Washington, D.C. The museum displayed them with a small plaque explaining their use in the film. Visitors stare at them in silence, trying to imagine the horror those tools represent. Prop or not, they still carry weight. Metal doesn't forget. Number 1. The film predicted CRISPR and gene editing in 1978. Genetic engineering was science fiction. The idea that you could edit a person's gnaw, choose their traits, design their future, it sounded impossible. But the boys from Brazil imagined it anyway. Mengele's plan wasn't just cloning. It was genetic destiny. He believed you could copy a person's body, recreate their environment, and produce the same result. He was wrong, but only partially. Fast forward to 2012. Scientists developed CRISPR, a tool that allows precise editing of gnaw. Suddenly, you could remove diseases, change eye color, enhance intelligence. Maybe the ethical questions exploded. Should we edit human embryos? Should we eliminate genetic disorders? What if someone uses this technology to create designer babies, or worse? In 2018, a Chinese scientist named Heijing Kui announced he had edited the genes of twin girls to make them resistant to HIV. The world was horrified. He was arrested, condemned, erased from the scientific community. But the technology didn't disappear. It's still here, growing, evolving. The boys from Brazil asked the question 40 years too early, what happens when science gives us the power to play God? The film didn't answer it. It just held up a mirror. Mengele failed because he thought genes controlled destiny. But the real danger isn't the science, it's the people who use it. Today, we have the tools Mengele dreamed of. We can clone, edit, design. The question is no longer can we, it's should we. And just like in the film, the answer depends on who's holding the scalpel. Fiction became prophecy, and prophecy became warning. Bonus fact, the final scene was almost silent. In the original ending, after Mengele dies and Lieberman burns the files, there was supposed to be no music, no dialogue, just silence. Schaffner wanted the audience to sit with the weight of what they had just seen. No easy resolution, no comforting score, just the sound of fire crackling and paper turning to ash. He filmed it that way. The final cut was tested with audiences, and the silence worked, maybe too well. People sat frozen in their seats. Some cried. Others just stared. But the studio hated it. They said it was too heavy, too bleak, too uncomfortable. They wanted a final music cue, something to signal closure. Goldsmith composed a quiet, somber piece, just strings and a single piano note. It was beautiful and sad, like a funeral hymn. Schaffner resisted, but the studio won. The music was added. When the film premiered, most people didn't even notice. The music was so subtle, it felt like part of the silence. But Schaffner always regretted it. He said the silence was more powerful because it forced the audience to think, to feel, to not escape. Years later, a director's cut was released with the silent ending restored. Film students study it in classes. They compare the two versions and debate which is better. Some say the music makes it easier to breathe. Others say the silence makes it impossible to forget. Both are right. Art doesn't always need a bow on top. Sometimes the most honest ending is the one that leaves you empty, uncertain, awake in the dark, wondering what you would have done if you were there. Silence is the loudest sound of all. The Boys from Brazil wasn't just a thriller about Nazis and clones. It was a film about memory, morality, and the dangerous belief that evil can be copied, controlled, or erased. It asked questions we're still trying to answer. Can science go too far? Can we judge children for their father's sins? Can monsters be made, or are they born? The film didn't preach or simplify. It trusted the audience to think, to wrestle with uncomfortable truths, to leave the theater unsettled. That's what great cinema does. It doesn't give you answers. It gives you questions that follow you home. Gregory Peck and Laurence Olivier gave performances that burned with truth. The crew filmed in the shadows of history. The music, the props, the locations, all of it was designed to remind us that evil isn't ancient history. It's a choice made every day by real people in real places. And the only thing standing between civilization and horror is memory. If we forget, it happens again. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them one story at a time.